Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with the Haydn Symphony Crusade. And we're up to Symphony number 65 in A major. This one has no nickname. Nobody knows it. Nobody cares. Well, that's true of most of these symphonies. It's terrible. It's a crime. It's a scandal. And 65, in a way, is a wonderful exemplar of just what everybody's missing with these symphonies, these no-name anonymous symphonies, because they all have something really interesting going on in them. And it's not something you need to hunt around for. Haydn's telling us right away, look at what I can do. And this particular work is fairly rich in the look at what I can do department. It is not as weird as number 64, Tempora mutantur, that times they are a-changin', but it has some very, very unusual features. First of all, let's talk about what binds the symphony together. There are two things, and it's just as plain as the nose on your face. The first thing that binds the symphony together, because every Haydn symphony, let's get this straight. You know, Haydn's biographer said he always considered his works whole. And this is such a new thing. You know, most people, I grew up thinking that, a classical symphony was four movements that had nothing in common other than the fact that they were grouped together in a certain predictable pattern, usually, quick, slow, minuet, quick, and called Symphony No. 2 or whatever they were called. But otherwise, you could sort of interchange them. And audiences in those days did that. Remember, Beethoven's Eighth was played with the allegretto from Beethoven's Seventh because people liked it better. And no one cared. No one thought anything of it. But Haydn really did. I mean, a symphony, despite having four separate parts, was one work. And so he took great pains to find subtle ways, or obvious ways, depending, that would allow us to hear it and feel satisfied. It wasn't like we were going to intellectually sit back and say, that second movement must be the second movement of Symphony number 65. It couldn't be number 62 or 63. Well, it couldn't be, actually. But the point isn't that. The point is that when you listen in real time and you come to the end of the finale, you feel like you've accomplished something, like something's happened, something intentional and coherent. That's really what the issue is. So in order to do that, Haydn often uses simple ideas to attach the movements to each other. And here, as I said, there are two of them. And I made a special example for one of them. The first of these is what I call the call and response theme, or question and answer. It's a very common thing in classical music. You may know the finale of Mozart's Symphony number 40. Mozart's in the closet, let him out, let him out, let him out. Mozart's in the closet, let him out, let him out, let him out. You have a question in the violins, and the full orchestra answers. Mozart's in the closet is the question, and the answer is let him out, let him out, let him out. Well, that structure, a call and response, it's often used in liturgical music for prayers. Somebody calls out a phrase and the congregation answers, things like that. Haydn uses that concept as the main ideas in three of these four movements. The first movement, the second movement, and the finale. They're all call and response type themes. And even though the themes are totally different, the calls are different. In the first movement, it's three chords and then a soft phrase repeated four times in descending scale positions. That's the call and response. In the slow movement, it is really strange. I mean, there is a little violin phrase, do-do-do-do-do, like this, and then the woodwinds answer. Then it does it again, and then there's just this weird repeated note figure thing that eventually the whole orchestra comes in on. And that's the call and response. And it's a different response every time you hear the call. It's very, very curious. The finale is a hunting movement. It has hunting horns. Doop-a-doop-a-doo, da-da-da-da-da-da-dum, ba-da-da-da-da-da-dum. And so that's it. The horn call is the call. The response is do, do-do-do-do-do-do, do-do-do-do-do-do. Really very simple. So I want to start off right now by playing you these three ideas. one after the other, with a little half a second pause between them, just so you get a sense. It's so important when you listen to Haydn not to worry about so much repeating the tune, but the shape of the tune, the structure of the tune. These ideas dealing with these similarities of shape as if they're objects. They're not melodies in the traditional sense. They're objects, and you can use them in many different ways. And that's one way that Haydn creates unity, by having similar objects, but at the same time allowing maximum variety. Because when you hear these three call and response ideas, all the calls are different, all the responses are different, the volume, the dynamics are different, everything about them is different. But the structure, the concept behind them is the same. And that's an incredibly helpful thing to know when you listen to Haydn particularly, but a lot of composers of the classical period too, because it was thanks to Haydn largely, a very, very widely adopted way of creating a feeling of unity for composers who cared about such things. Some of them didn't. So here we have, let's see, the Austro-Hungarian Haydn Orchestra under Adam Fischer, with the first, second, and fourth main themes of Symphony No. 65. Here they are. So that's the concept. Call, answer, call, answer. Now, the other idea that binds a lot of these pieces together, you already have heard, because it was in the second movement. It was that very strange, repeated note idea. That's it, repeated notes. And we'll talk about repeated notes as we go movement by movement. But you heard them twice already. You heard the opening of the response, the second response in the second movement, and the opening of the finale, the horn call. Dum-ba-dum-ba-dum, dun-da-dun-da-dun. It's all one note, just repeated notes. I mean, could anything be easier? But when you've made a point of them, as Haydn does, especially in that slow movement, that strange, weird passage that's nothing but repeated notes, and you don't know when they're going to end, and you don't know why he's doing it and what they are, and it's the oddity that makes it stand out. So once repeated notes have been designated as a thing, every time you hear repeated notes after that, you're going to think back to that thing. It's a psychological phenomenon. It's unavoidable and really, really interesting. And Haydn understood that because, see, Haydn was the supreme practical musician. He had his own private orchestra. He could experiment with anything he wanted. He could think, hey, I'm going to write this thing. Let me get some players in here. And he'd call the guys and say, hey, guys, let's try this out. Let's see what works. Let's see how this happens. And so he knew, as really very few composers before him knew, exactly how well each effect that he created would actually work in real time. I mean, he could experiment till he got it absolutely right, and he did. That's one of the most amazing things about it. Our musical culture is full of composers who write masterpieces, amazing masterpieces that they almost never get a chance to hear. I mean, that even happens now. I had a wonderful conversation with the Finnish composer Eino Juhani Rautavaara, and I asked him, about his Seventh Symphony. We were talking about it, and I said, do you know what something's going to sound like before you hear it, when you write it? And he said to me, well, you hope you do. You think you do. But then what happens, he said, is that you write it down and you hear it. and you think, oh God, that wasn't what I wanted, or oh, it didn't quite work out. And so then you revise everything. And that could be a real pain in the ass because your publisher has already published the thing the first time and they don't want to spend the money to, take on a load of revisions. And he said, and the other thing is that, I write it and it gets performed. I don't get to hear it. I may attend the premiere. I may hear a broadcast or some other performance, but generally speaking, once it's out there in the world, I don't get a chance to listen to it very often. I don't hear them that frequently. And of course, recordings help. But in Haydn's day, just imagine you're a composer, you write a piece, you don't know exactly what it's going to sound like. Then you hear it maybe once. It may never get played again in your lifetime or within your hearing. And our history of music is full of this phenomenon. Bruckner is one of the great phenomena, composers who never got to hear their music when they made revisions on revisions, all of it without having heard it or having heard it maybe once in a bad performance. And on this basis, they're supposed to know exactly what they want and how to achieve the desired effect. It's a very rare case that you have a composer like Haydn who had the opportunity to really experiment and listen and test in real time everything that he wanted to do. And I can't emphasize that strongly enough. That's just a major, major factor. So with that said, let us continue with Symphony number 65 in A major. So we're going to begin with the exposition of the first movement. This is a very interesting exposition because you have that answer. No, that's the last movement. Sorry. Byum, byum, byum. That's the first movement. It's actually rather similar sounding to the finale, isn't it? But that idea is used so frequently throughout the exposition and throughout the development that when it comes time for the recapitulation, we don't hear it at all. Haydn actually recapitulates beginning with the movement to the second subject, which is a very pretty tune all by itself. Rising and falling theme. You'll hear it, when you listen to it. I think one of the things we also need to keep in mind, and it's very, very evident in this symphony, is that the standard classical formula, exposition, development, recapitulation, which restates the exposition more or less as we heard it, except for some minor adjustments to keep it in the home key. Haydn didn't know any of that. He didn't care. Each movement does its own thing. So if you've heard something endlessly repeated in the development section, he may leave it out of the recapitulation because he doesn't feel we need to hear it again. Or he may wait until the very end to have it repeated as a nice, wonderful, comfortable conclusion to the whole movement. I mean, there's an unlimited amount of options, and Haydn will use all of them at one point or another. He tries everything. So this is a very interesting movement structurally, formally, and you should not make yourself crazy waiting for when the recapitulation happens, because the reality with Haydn is that he is such a developmental composer, a composer who he hates to repeat himself literally, that he begins developing the music really as soon as you hear it. As soon as you hear a theme, it may start modifying itself or morphing into something else. And he may just continue all the way to the end of the movement without even bothering to worry about these structural niceties that were only invented in the late 19th century to describe much, much later music that was far more rigid in form than Haydn ever intended to be. So I'm playing you just the exposition, but when you listen to the whole movement, think about its ongoing evolution and that wonderful little second subject, that beautiful little tune that comes back to remind us, because it's an island of stability in a sea of change. And that's how Haydn treats it. And if you said, the first movement is about an island of stability in a sea of change, you would be just as correct as if you talked about orthodox sonata form in 3 parts or whatever. It's a perfectly accurate description of what Haydn's doing. So let's listen to the exposition and all of the myriad ideas that Haydn tosses out, and then go listen to the first movement, the whole thing, and see what you make of it. Here it is. Very catchy, full of good ideas. It's all cheerful, enjoyable music. There are no real shadows of this music. An occasional minor key inflection or a little, bass line fun where it's all of a sudden it has a touch of indigestion. But basically it's all just very, very happy and pleasant, but fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. Now we come to the really wild stuff, the second movement. Now, the second movement, remember we listened in 64 for Tempora Mutantur, this very strange slow movement, very desolate, very odd, with these weird musical ideas coming and going. Well, Haydn sort of got into that at this period. And this symphony has almost another one of those. It's not quite as spooky and weird as number 64, but it's pretty unusual. What Haydn is working with is objects. And we've talked about this before too. The idea is, a musical idea isn't necessarily a tune. We're very used to composers such as, Mozart and Beethoven and later ones who were extremely vocally based. In other words, their idea of a musical theme was a genuine singable tune. And they're wonderful. But music has so much more than that. And Haydn was really interested in some of the other things that music could be. He wrote beautiful singable tunes. He did when he wanted to. But he also liked to play with other objects. And this is a movement that is like a deck of cards that he's constantly shuffling. They keep coming up in different order. You have that call and response opening, that little violin, whatever that thing is. And then you've got the oboes and horns. Bum ba da dum, bum ba da dum. That's an object. It's a thing, and it comes back, and it changes a little bit here and there, but essentially, it retains its unique object status throughout the movement. You never know when it's going to pop up. It just does in places. And then you've got same, opening, da 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 da, like that does that. And then you've got that repeated note thing, which is just, it's an object. It's repeated notes played quietly, then with a sudden orchestral eruption, and then it goes back to the question and answer or call and response. And the call itself gets divided up or broken up into bits. It is so weird. Because eventually, toward the end of the exposition, this is a movement in sonata form, you do get a longer, more sort of melodic thought. But that in itself is a separate object. And the entire point of this movement is that it's like a revolving, it's like a mobile, musical mobile, where you have different shapes hanging from, different levels of a structure, and it rotates. And these things come round, and you're not quite sure which one's coming when, because they are rotating maybe at different speeds. It's a sculpture. It's more like a musical sculpture than anything else. I love this aspect of Haydn's art because there really isn't anybody at the period who's doing the same thing, who has this concept of music as objects of infinite variety and color and shape and size, and they can all be arranged and transformed, and it's fascinating. So I'm going to play you the complete exposition and the beginning of the repeat of the exposition, because again, it's all so seamless. You don't exactly know when you'll hear the opening and then the little horn and oboe thing. But what I mean is there aren't any natural breaks for formal purposes. You don't say, the exposition ended there, the development began there. It's not about that at all. These objects just keep shifting and rotating and coming up, and it's really absolutely nifty. So listen to it and don't think about tunes. Think about shapes, sculptures, kaleidoscopic variety. That's what this is. Here you go. Fascinating stuff. Absolutely fascinating. And no one else was doing anything like this, quite frankly. Nobody. I mean, I've listened to boatloads of music from the classical period, and, most composers wrote nice singable tunes, and, but Haydn was dealing with such a much wider musical vocabulary than anybody before him, and really than most people since. He really is a thing there. Okay, so the Minuet. The Minuet and Trio. Oh, this Minuet is more fun than anyone has any right to have. First of all, the Minuet itself. Well, minuets, as you know, are in 3/4 time. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1. Well, this one isn't exactly. Most of Haydn's symphonic minuets are rhythmically tricky. You can't really dance to them. And this one you really can't dance to because parts of it are in 4, not 3. Now, he notates it in 3, but the rhythm is in 4, because you may have noticed that 4 bars in 3/4 time equals 12 beats. Well, 12 beats can be divided into 4 beats of 3 or 3 chunks of 4. And so you've got some 3 chunks of 4 here, and you don't know where the 3 chunks of 4 are going to pop up in the minuet and in the second half of the minuet, because they pop up in different places. So it is a completely confounding. If anyone tried to dance to this, they would wind up breaking their leg, and then someone would get sued and they would lose their chateau. I mean, so it's really an incredible thing. So here's the minuet. And it does, you don't have to worry about like repeated notes or call and response or anything. It's just all about having a good time with rhythm. Oh, I love this movement. It is so much fun. It's so unexpected. Here it is. Now, the middle section, the trio section, is, if anything, even wackier, because not only does it do the same rhythmic thing that the minuet itself does. The minuet itself did it with 4-note groupings in 3-time. This one, the trio uses 2-note groupings in 3-time. So it's not exactly the same, but it's just as tricky rhythmically. But also it's based on repeated notes. Yep, 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 like that. And so that in turn recalls the repeated notes in the slow movement and unifies that movement with everything that we've heard before. I love this thing. I mean, Fischer, as usual, in trio sections, reduces the string section to solo instruments, which is wrong, because Haydn often uses solo strings in his trios. But if you're always doing it that way anyway, what's the point, right? That always annoys me, but it's okay. You'll get the music. And the music itself is in a minor key. It's one of Haydn's exotic excursions, as H.C. Robbins Landon, the great Haydn scholar, used to call them. You know, his Hungarian folk music or Eastern Slavic something. It's musical exoticism. It's Rimsky-Korsakov. It's Scheherazade. It's that kind of music. But it's that kind of music with really tricky and eccentric rhythms. So here is the trio section. I mean, don't you just love it? Isn't that just like cool? And you know, it's well, there you go. So that's the minuet, and it does have that repeated note motive, so that we know that it's part of this whole symphony. And then we get to the finale. Now, the finale, as I said, is also combines the repeated note idea, which is the horn call, the call and response, which is the answer, and also because it's a hunting piece. Hunting pieces are usually in 6/8 time. In other words, they go 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, like that. Haydn wrote lots of hunting movements. I mean, there's the Hunt Symphony, which we'll get to. It's number 73. And, you know, the horn signal stuff. I mean, there's hunting music throughout Haydn's oeuvre. I mean, fabulous hunting choruses of the seasons. And, you know, it was one of those topics, or topoi, that were so common in the classical period. The sound of hunting horns as the aristocracy, the nobility, you know, got their horses and folks together and dogs and whatnot, and they all went, you know, galloping across the countryside, killing things. So the hunting motive is very common, and it's very common in Haydn's finales because it makes for light, enjoyable, you know, rollicking kind of finales in these compound meters, these 1, 2, 3, The finale of the military symphony is quite similar, both in melodic shape and rhythm to this one. Also, number which is the one, the drum roll symphony, I think, does something like it. But you hear them all over the place. It's, you know, the cool thing about these is that they also always partake of repeated note figures, because hunting calls are so you'll hear that, and that's natural accompaniment, you know, the accompanimental music. It's just the way the music is constructed and shaped, and Haydn doesn't have to worry about being specific and saying, oh, look, I'm doing repeated notes again, because we're already attuned to them. So when we hear dum-ba-dum-ba-dum on the horns, and then we hear the accompanimental figures with all those repeated note figurations, it's become as natural as breathing itself. We don't think of Haydn making a point. It's just that feeling of being in a familiar place, in speaking a language that we know, that we're comfortable with because we've heard it before, but there's nothing in this movement that we've literally heard previously. It's all new music. And that is the genius of Haydn, my friends. It's screaming genius. So we'll listen to the exposition of this movement, and then you can go listen to the whole delicious symphony. You ready? Here it is. Number 65, a symphony no one's heard of, nobody cares about, nobody wants to know from, nobody ever plays. And it's just oozing elements of originality and character and expressive point. And, it's the universe's loss. It really is. So keep on listening, friends. Thanks for joining me. Take care.